Hi, I am here after a bit of time with another update about the MZ40 Bruteforce and how it is going. This video is going to be once again quite a technical one. I will show you a lot of detail about how I have been trying to simulate different intake versions and why the conventional design doesn't work, and I will show you a new design which I came up with recently, which is not conventional and it might overcome the issue of all the previous intakes. I also did a lot of work on the pump simulation and I made it significantly more accurate, so that at this point it is for the first time ever being able to simulate and produce meaningful results, which should be accurate enough for the automatic optimizer I am going to use. I will show you the simulation in the second part of this video. So here is once again the flow in the MZ35 intake. Here we have the incoming water from the lake, and as it is approaching the intake, it has to steer upwards to follow the roof of the intake. The obvious problem with the MZ35 intake is the dead zone right here, because at this point separation happens, and here the flow continues not attached to the surface anymore. This creates backflow and turbulence right here, which creates a lot of loss, and overall the intake is not efficient. The efficiency of this intake is about 30%. This can be partly improved if we add a loader into the MZ35 intake. This has been proven to add about 5 km per hour to the top speed of the boat if the loader is used. The loader improves the flow in the upper part of the intake, but the flow is separated right behind the loader, creating another dead zone right here. So this is also not efficient enough for what I want to achieve with the MZ40 Bruteforce. So with the MZ40, what I initially tried was extending the intake in order to keep the angle of the roof less steep right here. The situation here is maybe improved by like 5%. This is a little bit more efficient than before. But conceptually, this intake is still the same, and it suffers from the conceptually same issue, which is the separation on the roof. I spent a lot of time experimenting with double loaders for the MZ40 Bruteforce intake. I tried to shape the loaders in various ways. I even tried to optimize the shape of the loader in such a specific way that the area right here would be increasing very smoothly across the whole ramp up to this point. And I would try to move the loaders in a way that the area would increase very evenly in all parts of the intake. However, the pressure loss when passing through this passage was so high that this was not worth it at all. And so eventually I discarded this concept of double loaders completely. One more promising thing I found at this stage was that I can angle the driveshaft down. Why would I do that? Because this angling the driveshaft down pushes this passage a little bit downwards by maybe 5 mm, and this makes the roof right here less steep, and as you can see the flow here stayed attached up to about this point, which is an improvement over what we had before. However, this intake creates another problem, which is actually very important, and that is the wake right here. This is a wake, and this is what you would have behind your car. This is where the water is trapped. It is a pocket of water which is dragged forward with the boat, and this of course creates a lot of drag, and this is not acceptable design. All in all, different versions of the conventionally designed intake shapes didn't give me the performance I was expecting. And so I went back to the drawing board. The thing is, why did I even design the MZ35 intake like this in the first place? This is just because the full-scale intakes on real-life large boats look more or less like this. But when I looked into this more, I found that the conditions at which the full-scale intakes on large ships are operating are completely different. So let's say the boat is driving at a velocity of 20 meters per second. The full-scale intakes are usually designed so that the speed of the water right here is about 0.8 times smaller, so that means we would have about 16 meters per second here. The MZ35 is designed in such a way that the velocity at this point is only about 5 meters per second. This means that instead of slowing down to about 80% of the original speed, now in our boats, the water has to slow down only down to about 25% of the original speed. And now it becomes obvious that this kind of intake doesn't work because the situation is just completely different. And so I went a bit out of the box and designed this. I found this shape pretty much by a coincidence, and I realized quickly that this is a way more promising approach. As you can see, the ramp of this intake is not steep at all. This is about 8 degrees up to this point where it starts accelerating upwards rapidly, and at the same time the area from here to here is expanding. Here we have something which looks a bit like an airfoil. This helps to eliminate the wake which was present with the intake I presented before with the shaft angled downwards. In context of a hull, the new intake looks like this. And in the simulation, believe me or not, this is by far the best intake I have ever tested. The flow stays attached to the ramp the whole time. Here there is a little bit of separation, but the flow attaches again quickly and stays attached up to this point, where the velocity is already quite low and a lot of pressure is restored. The airfoil shape here works to eliminate largest part of the wake. This intake not only shows better flow right here, better shape of the streamlines, which is advantageous for efficiency of the impeller, but it also increases the efficiency to about 85%, which is more than 2 times better than all the previous intake versions. We can also take a look at the static pressure, and we can see that this intake recovers almost 1 atmosphere of static pressure. This is what the intake is supposed to do. I already printed this intake and tried testing it with the older MJ35, but to have a conclusion about performance and if this actually works, I need to pair it with the new pump, which is designed directly for this. So about the pump simulation again. I previously tried to design an automatic optimizer for the MJ40 Bruteforce geometry. How this worked was I designed a set of parameters which would describe the pump geometry. Then I designed some code which generates the geometry automatically from these parameters. And then I would send the geometry into the simulation to evaluate the performance. This way I could iterate through all different geometries and try to find the best one. The issue with the previous version, and the reason why this didn't work, was because the simulation itself was not nearly enough accurate to be able to produce meaningful results. Because the predictions were off, the final resulting best geometry also was very off. And so I worked on improving accuracy of the simulation. And after many improvements, I ended up with the result I'm going to show you now. Here is a comparison of the old simulation, which is on the left, and the new one, which is on the right. If you have a good resolution on your screen, you can see that the old simulation has the veins quite pixelated, and actually the whole flow is quite pixelated. This is because the best resolution I was able to achieve with the old simulation version was about 0.3 mm. The resolution of the new simulation is 0.08 mm. This is more than 3 times better. It means that the whole MJ35 pump is filled with about 120 million cubes, which have side of 0.08 mm. The simulation takes about 20 gigabytes, and calculating it on a GPU takes about 20 minutes. I will now show you the new simulation running. To find how accurate the simulation is, I decided to compare the data from the MJ40 Bruteforce static thrust tests and compare it against my results from the simulation. This is a static thrust test. On the x-axis there is RPM of the pump, and on y-axis there is thrust produced in newtons during a static thrust test. The gray points are the results of the measurement, the black line is a function fit through the measurement, and the green points are results of my simulation. And as you can see, the latest version of the simulation is actually, for the first time ever, actually accurate. The trend of the thrust is captured perfectly, and maximum error in predicted thrust is only about 5%. Not only thrust is well captured by the simulation, but also torque prediction is very good. The torque prediction for the low RPM range is almost perfect, and for the high RPM range there is again something like 5% of error in predicted torque. The error here is finally small enough so that the results from some kind of automatic optimization of the pump geometry should produce something which works meaningfully in real life as well, which is a game changer. Now, if we look at the MJ35, which is a completely different geometry, to have at least two independent tests, we can see that for the low RPM range, the error once again is very small. And here for the high RPM range of the MJ35, this is the first point that is not accurately captured by the simulation. And I know why this is happening. In high RPM range, the MJ35 starts cavitating very badly. This is why the thrust curve here of the MJ35 is not so steep anymore. However, cavitation is not programmed in the simulation. The simulation basically doesn't know that cavitation even exists, and so it overpredicts the produced thrust. In fact, the cavitation region is visible in the simulation. This region here is where the simulation shows that the pressure is lower than a vacuum pressure. Such thing will never happen in real life, and this is what the simulation doesn't understand. When I'm going to design the automatic optimizer, I will have to account for this and probably do some kind of calculation of how much cavitation is expected. To finish this comparison, let's look at MJ35 static torque, and the torque is once again perfect for the low RPM region, and for the cavitating point right here, the torque is a little bit off, but not nearly as bad as the thrust is off. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching if you have come this far. If you are interested in anything, write me in the comments. I'm interested to hear what you think. And yeah, for now, go and make your boat fly.